This week on Logan Holmes Watches, we explore the weighty topics such as what does it mean to be human and why do we yet have flying cars. That's right, we're headed all the way to the future of 2019 as I take a look at Blade Runner. Blade Runner is a 1982 film that combines elements from both noir and cyberpunk. The film is loosely based on the 1968 novel Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep, written by legendary science fiction author Philip K. Dick, and follows Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, a special type of police officer called a Blade Runner. Blade Runners are tasked with finding and retiring renegade androids called replicants, a group of which has found their way to Earth in the city of Los Angeles. The group is creating havoc in the city, and Deckard has to come out of retirement to find and eliminate them. So begins one of the most visually stunning movies ever created. In fact, one of the first two DVDs I ever purchased was Blade Runner, and to this day I still remember noticing anytime I paused the film, thinking to myself how much I'd love a poster of what I saw on the screen. If you ever need to find an example of a film that has a distinct look and feel, look no further than this movie. Just based on the visuals alone, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this movie to anyone, but thankfully there's also a great story and strong acting performances to go along with them. Not content to just be eye candy, Blade Runner deals with some weighty subject matter, such as slavery, class systems, and even what it means to be human. Blade Runner was directed by Ridley Scott. Scott directed such other films as Black Hawk Down, Gladiator, and Alien, the latter of which actually shares a cinematic universe with Blade Runner. At the end of Alien, while attempting to escape the xenomorph, that film's protagonist Ripley uses a computer where the screen turns from blue to red with the words Purge written on it. That same screen can be seen in Blade Runner when Officer Gaff, played by James Olmos, turns on the engines to his flying police vehicle. In an extra on the 1999 20th anniversary DVD of Alien, it is revealed that the character of Dallas is receiving a paycheck from the Tyrell Corporation, the central company in the Blade Runner story. Both franchises also share similar themes with the creation and dangers of artificial life and the nature of humanity. Speaking of Scott, did you know that his initial cut of Blade Runner was over 4 hours long? While those that managed to see this version seemingly agreed that it was visually stunning and a beautiful work of cinema, many also felt that even with all the extra time to tell the story, the plot was incomprehensible and a chore to sit through. Because of this, Scott went back and edited down the length to a reasonable runtime, included a voiceover narration to provide exposition to the original theatrical release of the film. Harrison Ford hated this narration and was forced to do it by the studio. That unhappiness is reflected in the work because the narration sounds rather flat, like Ford would have preferred to be doing just about anything else at the time.
The charmer's name was Gaff. I'd seen him around. Bryant must have upped him to the Blade Runner unit. That gibberish he talked was city speak, gutter talk, a mishmash of Japanese, Spanish, German, what have you. I didn't really need a translator. I knew the lingo every good cop did. But I wasn't going to make it easier for him.
Until recently, I never saw this version, as growing up I only saw the final cut, which has this narration removed. I'm not quite sure where all the hate for this version comes from, as I find the added narration really adds to the noir feel of a movie, and helps to answer many small questions about certain characters, particularly with the Gaff character. While I do love the final cut, I find it has more ethereal qualities that the original theatrical version lacks, and the theatrical version seems to have an added layer of grittiness that really lends itself to the detective mystery aspects of the plot. Lead actor Ford had just finished filming the blockbuster Raiders of the Lost Ark. In that movie, his character Indiana Jones is seldom seen without his iconic fedora. Perhaps because of this, in an attempt to further separate that character from Deckard, Ford insisted that the character never be seen wearing a hat throughout the film. Ford and the film's director also repeatedly butted heads and had frequent disagreements during the film's production. Along with a previous dislike for the voiceover narration, as Ford felt the story would be better suited if the audience actually got to see Deckard perform the actions instead of being told about them. That would certainly lend itself to the old adage that in film it is better to show than to tell. The main point of contention seems to be derived from how both Ford and Scott viewed the character of Deckard, and whether or not he was actually a replicant. That term was thought up by the screenwriter's daughter, who was studying microbiology in college at the time, and doesn't appear anywhere in the actual book. Ford felt that he and Scott had agreed that the character wasn't a replicant, and he felt betrayed after seeing the finished film, where this aspect of the plot was left rather ambiguous. Rutger Hauer, who played lead replicant Roy Batty, also felt that the ambiguity over Deckard's origins hurt the overall theme of man versus machine. Speaking of Hauer, did you know that he came up with a lot of the ideas for his character? For example, it was his idea to change much of the final speech, as he felt the original way it was written was too technical and lacked the poetic quality that was needed to convey the character's motivation. In fact, he also added one of the famous final lines of dialogue, and it was his idea to hold a dove while delivering the speech.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
Hauer landed the role without ever meeting Scott, and upon their first meeting decided to have a little fun with the director by showing up to it already having platinum blonde dyed hair and wearing pink satin pants, a sweater with a fox draped over the shoulder, as well as sporting ruby red eye contacts and wacky Elton John inspired green sunglasses. Now, this probably left quite an impression on Scott and caused him to briefly rethink his choice for lead antagonist. Budgetary problems also plagued the production of Blade Runner, which led to the production needing to get creative and repurpose many of the set pieces found on the studio's backlot, including those from other movies such as the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The ceiling of a mothership was actually used as the top of the police station in Blade Runner, and the Millennium Falcon from another of Harrison Ford's other famous film franchises, you might have heard of it, Star Wars, can also be found in the film, but not as a flying ship, but as a building in the city's landscape. The closing scene is actually unused footage from the film The Shining, and was gifted for use to Scott by its director Stanley Kubrick, with only one caveat, that being that only unused footage could be used. Ridley Scott originally turned down the job of directing Blade Runner, instead choosing to focus his attention on his adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, but several factors caused this to fall through. Scott's older brother passed away during pre-production, and Scott was frustrated with the slow progress being made towards getting his version of Dune made, so instead he agreed to direct Blade Runner, partly in hopes that the faster pace of the film would help him deal with the grief over his brother's death. It was this bereavement that probably contributed to the rather gloomy tones and visual style of the film. I find this somewhat interesting, as anyone that has seen any version of Blade Runner would be hard-pressed to describe it as anything close to a fast-paced movie. But along with the previously mentioned issues that Scott had with his lead actor Ford, he also experienced problems dealing with American film unions. Scott was used to shooting in Britain and was unhappy with the fact that he was not allowed to operate the camera himself due to union rules, which prevented him from working in the style that he was used to. Along with this, Scott encountered frequent questions relating to his filming process, and Scott's perfectionism would cause him to be seen as both cold and distant to the rest of the film's crew. Such tensions also ended up creating a somewhat humorous war towards the end of production, which was inspired by Scott giving an interview to a British reporter, where he stated that he preferred to work with British film crews when making movies. This led to the Blade Runner's American crew members wearing shirts that contained derogatory phrases directed at Scott. This in return would lead to Scott wearing t-shirts of his own with slogans directed at his crew. This hostile environment had to make for a fun, enjoyable film experience. Thankfully, the wearing t-shirts actually diffused a lot of attention on the set, although this didn't stop executive producers from firing Scott once principal filming had concluded. Scott would eventually be rehired, but those producers kept the artistic control and final cut privileges, which caused them to add an uplifting ending to the theatrical cut of the film that included the aforementioned unused footage of The Shining and an additional voiceover by Ford against Scott's wishes. The title Blade Runner is another term that is never mentioned in the original novel, as the police officers that hunt the replicants are just referred to as bounty hunters. The title Blade Runner actually comes from a completely unrelated source, that being the 1974 novel The Blade Runner by author Alan E. Nourse. The film's co-writer was unhappy with the working titles of the film, and he recommended going with this one instead. Another aspect of the movie is the red-eye glint that all the replicants share. This effect was created by Eugene, and I hope I'm not butchering this, Schaffhausen, a cinematographer that worked on the 1927 film Metropolis, and this effect is known as the Schaffhausen process, where a piece of half-mirrored glass is mounted onto a camera at a 45-degree angle so that it can bounce red light into the actor's eyes. Blade Runner would be a box office failure, along with John Carpenter's The Thing, which is another one of my favorite films and will definitely be the subject of a future episode of Logan Holmes Watches, but I digress. Because both films were released in 1982, around the same time as the juggernaut that was E.T. the Extraterrestrial, they got overlooked. Thankfully, both The Thing and Blade Runner would go on to find an audience that appreciated them for the amazing movies that they are, thanks to the home video market. Speaking of releases, Blade Runner is one of the first films to receive multiple and distinctly different versions of the film. The Blu-ray I own contains 4 different cuts of the film, including the director's cut, which oddly enough Scott had nothing to do with. It wasn't until 2007 when he was able to release the final cut of the film. Well, that's not in any way confusing, is it? So that was my coverage of Blade Runner. While it can hardly be considered a happy, uplifting film, it certainly is great, and one that I would never hesitate to recommend if you love movies. In particular, if you're looking for something to test out your home television and accompanying sound system, as it is both a visual and auditory delight. In fact, if I had to say what movie had the most profound effect on the creation of my love of film, it would be Blade Runner. And that has played a big part in my decision that after I've completed my bachelor's degree, I hope to go on to grad school and learn how to make my own movies. Thank you very much for tuning in to this week's episode of Logan Holmes Watches. And I should probably mention that if you think I sound differently this week, it's because I'm recovering from a cold, which of course is the bane of anyone that uses their voice to do their job. Hopefully I will be back to my normal self next week. Unless you like how I sound, then I will probably purposely go out of my way to lick the handrails at random bus stops. I'm kidding. Kids don't do that. Let me know your thoughts on this week's episode and on Blade Runner by emailing me, and this is all one word, therealloganholmes@gmail.com. Until we meet again, folks, don't get into any strange flying cars and always put out any fires on your attack ships. I'm Logan Holmes, and you've been listening to Radio Care.